January 4th, 2025, VIHE, and we're going to be going over Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5, text 25 to 31. 25. Nisham yai tat suto vacho, hiranyakashipus tada, guru putram uvachedam, Rusha praspur itadhara. After hearing these words of devotional service from the mouth of his son Prahlad, that's the 9 processes that we read yesterday, Hiranyakashipu was extremely angry. His lips trembling, he spoke as follows to Shanda, the son of his guru Sukra Acharya. Brahma Bando Kim Etate Vipaksham Shrastyata Sata Asaram Grahito Balo Mam Anandritya Durmate. O unqualified, most hideous son of a Brahmana, you have disobeyed my order and taken shelter of the party of my enemies. You have taught this poor boy about devotional service. What is this nonsense? So you notice he's again blaming the teachers. Shantiya sadavo loke durmaitras chadmaveshinha tesham udet yagam kale rogapata kinam iva. In due course of time, various types of diseases are manifest in those who are sinful. Similarly, in this world, there are many deceptive friends in false garbs, but eventually, because of their false behavior, their actual enmity becomes manifest. Shri Guru Putra Uvacha Namat Pranitam Na Para Pranitam Suto Vadatyesha Tavendra Shatro Naisar Gikiyam Matir Ashtirajam Niyachamanyum Kad Adas Smamana. The son of Sukracharya, Hiranyakashipu's spiritual master, said, O enemy of King Indra, O king, whatever your son Prahlad has said was not taught to him by me or anyone else. His spontaneous devotional service has naturally developed in him. Therefore, please give up your anger and do not unnecessarily accuse us. It is not good to insult a Brahmana in this way. So, of course, that's what Prahlad Maharaj said to them. He said, this is spontaneous, like iron to a magnet. I didn't learn it from anyone. He did not mention Narada. And so Shanda is repeating the same thing. Shri Narada Uvacha, Gurun Aivam Prati Prokto, Bhuya Atta Shara Sutam, Nached Guru Mukiyam Te, Kuto Badra Sati Matihi. Shri Narada Muni continued, when Hiranyakashipu received this reply from the teacher, he again addressed his son Prahlad. Hiranyakashipu said, you rascal, most fallen of our family, if you have not received this education from your teachers, where have you gotten it? So the same question, who was the person? Prahlad does not tell them. Again, interesting, he does tell his classmates later on. Shri Parada Uvacha Matir Nakrishne Padatasvatova Mito Bibhat Yeta Graham Vratanam Adanta Gobir Vishatam Tamishram Puna Punaschar Vitachar Vinana. Very important verse that Prabhupada quotes a lot. Prahlad Maharaj replied, because of their uncontrolled senses, persons too addicted to materialistic life may make progress towards hellish conditions and repeatedly chew that which has already been chewed. Their inclinations toward Krishna are never aroused, either by the instructions of others, by their own efforts, or by a combination of both. It's got a strange answer. Where did you learn this from? You know, materialistic people can't learn it from anywhere. Prahlad was responding as if his father had been asking where he could learn it. You know, like, where'd you get this from? So I can buy it too, you know. Where'd you get this from? You're not going to be able to learn it. So it's an interesting answer. Nate vidu swartagatim hi Vishnu durasaya ye bahir artamanina anda yatandar upaniyamanas Te Pishtatantram Urudam Nibadaha. Again, a very famous verse, especially the first line. Srila Prabhupada quotes a lot, and often the first and second line. Persons who are strongly entrapped by the consciousness of enjoying material life and who have therefore accepted as their leader or guru a similar blind man attached to external sense objects cannot understand that the goal of life is to return home back to Godhead and engage in the service of Lord Vishnu. As blind men guided by another blind man miss the right path and fall into a ditch, materially attached men led by another materially attached man are bound by the ropes of fruit of labor, which are made of very strong cords, and they continue again and again in materialistic life, suffering the threefold miseries. Okay. Things are heating up. So we're still in the area of Prahlad's devotion to Vishnu and Hiranyakashipu's response to that. And summary of these verses is that Prahlad continues to respond to his father with increasingly strong statements about the glories of bhakti and the foolishness of materialists like his father. At first, his father becomes angry at the teachers and then turns his anger on Prahlad, who gets even stronger and even sarcastic. So we have some basic questions here. And these are questions that I asked very early on in joining the Hare Krishna movement. Why do some people take up bhakti and others don't? I mean, I remember thinking, wow, like I read the Bhagavad Gita and immediately I'm just completely entranced. So I figure, well, all I have to do is just give the Bhagavad Gita to people and they're going to feel the same way. And it didn't always happen. Sometimes I gave the Bhagavad Gita to someone and they're just like, well, I'm not really interested in this. So I remember just being so confused by that. Just like, why aren't you taking up bhakti? And why is bhakti difficult for some but easy for others? What makes bhakti harder for some? I mean, and we may ask this question because we feel that bhakti is hard for us, but easy for someone else. And really, this is answered by Prahlad's question, by Prahlad's answer. So we'll look at that at the end. And the themes here are, and these are, again, in some form or another, these are basic themes of this whole Leela, is that there's this difference between the consciousness, the view of materialist and spiritualist, that bhakti seems insubstantial and inauspicious to a materialist. They think there's nothing to it and they think it's bad for you. And although it's the most substantial thing and the most auspicious thing, and it's our own attachment to material enjoyment, which of course Krishna said in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhogaishwarya, on our own attachments to material enjoyment that prevent us from understanding bhakti, even if we're instructed by great devotees. All right. So, looking at verses 25 to 29 is when Hiranyakashipu becomes angry. And we will note that in the previous verses, the one we went over yesterday, Hiranyakashipu was feeling such affection for Prahlad. He was crying with affection. He's holding Prahlad, he's smelling him, he's crying, he's just, my son, I love you so much. And then, boom, he becomes furious. And he turns his anger on his teachers, which, of course, happened previously. So the first time, this is a rerun, kind of. So Hiranyakashipu had been angry at the teachers, and the teachers said, no, we didn't teach him this. And then Hiranyakashipu assumed that other people must be infiltrating the school in disguise. So again, he's turning his anger to the teachers because he told them, don't let anyone in. Now, text 26, Hiranyakashipu feels that bhakti has no substance. There's nothing to it. And of course, materialistic people, atheistic people often feel like this, that it's something just, it doesn't mean anything. It's just something mystical. It's not practical. It has no value. That devotional service, it's not going to help you make money. It's not going to help you have material pleasures. It's not even necessarily intellectually satisfying. People think about devotional service as just being some sort of blind faith. They can't sense it. They think that, something has to be gross matter. Now, devotees feel like this about materialism. So devotees' mentality is that the spiritual is substantive and materialistic things are not. We talk about gross and subtle matter, and then the most subtle is not matter at all, that it's spiritual. So it may seem like the more gross something is, the more substance it has. In scientific terms, we can think about mass. And, the mind appears very insubstantial, even to a very gross materialist. In fact, there are scientists who don't believe that there is such a thing as mind. They think that there's just brain. There's no subtle mind. Even though there's so much evidence about people who have, like near-death experiences where they're existing outside the body. Even, they'll be in an operating theater, right? In the surgical, the operating room, the OR. When I was traveling recently, a devotee who was giving me a ride, I said, "What do you do for a living?" She said, "Well, I work in theater." And I thought she meant like performing arts, but she meant she was a surgical nurse who worked in the operating theater. So people are in the operating theater and somebody, their heart stops, their brain stops, they're dead. And the subtle body leaves the gross body, and sometimes they're hovering by the ceiling. And they can see, oh, somebody left a screwdriver on top of the cabinet, and there's a sticker on the light bulb. And when they're resuscitated and they come back in their body, they say, "Oh, I saw these things by the ceiling that there's no way they could have seen by being on the operating table." And there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of accounts like this that can be verified by this sort of evidence, that they saw or heard things that they couldn't possibly have seen or heard on the operating table. And still, people deny that there's any mind beyond the brain. Even if they want to say that these near-death experiences are some kind of electrical something in the brain, how do people have these perceptions? It's impossible. And then when it comes to spiritual things, when it comes to God, when it comes to the soul, then they're completely skeptical. They just say, "Well, what's our evidence that it exists? Can you show me God?" Which, of course, Hiranyakashipu later says, "Can you show me God?" And we devotees may think that way too. We may think that, well, this matter, this table, this body, this clothes, this is substantial, and the mind is less substantial, and the soul is even less substantial. But actually, it's exactly the opposite. And matter is very insubstantial. Now, how can we say that gross matter is very, let's think about this. So the soul, the spiritual soul, is eternal. It's never been created, and it never dies. Right? Najayate mriyate vakadachid nayam bhutva bhabitavana bhuyaha ajo nitya sasvato yam purano nahanyate hanyamane shure. There's no birth, there's no death. It's always existed, and it's changeless. The Lord says that the spirit is changeless. So it's always existed as it is. Now you take the mind it shifts, it changes. The mind we had, intelligence we had when we were 2, hopefully that's changed. Hopefully we don't have the mind and intelligence of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old. And I would assume we don't even have the mind and intelligence of a 14-year-old. So that's less substantial. And when we're talking about, one body to another, but even if we just talk about in this life, but if we talk about from one body to another, those of us who are female now, we may have been male in another life. In fact, we almost definitely were. And those who are male now were almost definitely female in another life. And we have almost definitely been in bodies other than that of human beings. We've almost definitely been in bodies of demigods. And probably some of us, unfortunately, have been in bodies of animals or maybe even insects and birds and trees and all these things. So that's a big change in the subtle body. So that's not very substantial. I mean, we find even in this particular section of verses, Hiranyakashipu's mind changes dramatically and very quickly from this deep affection to anger. It's not substantial. The state of his mind is flickering. And then if we're going to look at gross matter, so it's even more flickering than the mind. That, I have a desk here made out of wood. So before it was a desk, it was a tree. Before it was a tree body, it was just earth and water and sunlight. So, sunlight, the seed is pulling minerals from the earth and it's pulling water. And then it's pulling the light of the sun and turning it into a tree body, which then gets turned into a desk. Or we have some trees, dead trees outside that are rotting and going back to earth. They're going back to water and sunlight. And if you burn wood, then the sunlight gets released as in the fire, the sun's light and heat, and the water gets released as water vapor, and the earth turns back into minerals, and then there's no more tree. It's completely insubstantial. And these bodies are changing at every moment. According to modern science, even our cells are constantly reproducing and changing. And so our body is it's like a river that what do they say? You can't dip into the same river twice, because whenever you dip into it, the water's moving. So our body's actually very, very insubstantial. And these forms, desk and pot and clothes, and they're very temporary. And this is not going to stay a piece of cloth for very long. So it's really just the opposite. And then you could also say it's just the opposite in terms of value. So the real value is the soul. And of course, that's obvious because of the way that we treat dead bodies. So, of course, we show special respect to dead human bodies. Generally, we show special respect to dead human bodies, much more than we show to dead animal bodies or dead insect bodies or dead worm bodies or something like that, dead reptile bodies, dead plant bodies. We don't take very much care of them. We do take care of dead human bodies out of respect for the person who lived in it. But still, we burn it. We burn it, or we bury it, or something like that, even though there's some sort of ceremony. But when do we really take care of the body? When the soul's in the body. The soul is what has really substantial value. And Prabhupada will talk a lot about how, when we're alive, we take good care. If you have a little cut on your finger, you're going to take care of it. You're going to put some dressing on, you're going to put something on it and preserve it, because you're in the body. But if your finger gets cut off, like one of my god sisters in a sugarcane juicing machine, she lost parts of her fingers. And then the mangled fingers, they have no value. So even when it comes substance in terms of endurance, but also substance in terms of value. And even the mind. People, if they get some kind of problem with their mind, they get Alzheimer's, they get dementia, or they've had some stroke or something where their mind is not functioning. But if the soul is there, generally speaking, we still care for the person. You know, a person will have some elderly relative who doesn't even recognize them anymore and doesn't even know, oh, you're my husband, you're my son, I have no idea. And so their body has changed, their mind has changed, but still, oh, this is still my mother. This is still whatever, my husband. Why? Because the soul is there. So it's the soul that really has value. You know, if you just make a picture or a sculpture of somebody, oh, it doesn't have the value of the presence of the soul. So the devotees see this substance exactly the opposite of the materialist. And it's an opposite viewpoint. Now, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur does what he often does, and he takes the words of the demon and turns them around to mean the opposite of what the speaker intended them to mean. We were talking yesterday about hermeneutics and how statements in the Shastra and by guru, by acharyas, can be in four categories. They're either a restatement, they're either a restatement of Siddhanta, or they're a contextualization of Siddhanta. In other words, if they're a restatement of Siddhanta, then they're true for everybody at all times and all circumstances. They're universal, eternal, and trans-contextual. If they're a contextualization of Siddhanta, they're true for everybody on all times, but it's that truth is being exhibited in a particular context. Like you can always access the Supreme through sound, but what sound may change in context. It may be the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, it may be Omkara, so forth. Then we have that things that support Siddhanta. They're not true in all places, in all times, in all contexts, but they support what's true in all times, in all places, in all contexts. A lot of rules of proper behavior are like that. And then things that are opposed to Siddhanta. Now, we do have statements that are opposed to Siddhanta, sometimes even from the Lord. But the majority, like his instructions to Nanda Maharaj about Govardhan Puja, but the majority of the statements in the scripture that are opposed to Siddhanta are the statements spoken by the demons. And you can't eliminate those from the Shastra and still have the narrative. Yes? So sometimes people will say, well, we take everything in Shastra as true. Okay, but when we're looking at the word true, are we going to say that all the statements of the demons that are in the Shastra are true? They're true in the sense that the demons actually spoke them. They're true in the sense that they're part of the Lord's Leela, but the particular philosophical point that the demons are making is generally, not always, sometimes the demons speak philosophical truth, but generally is not true. So we have people like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur who don't like this very much. And so they use the rules of Sandhi in Sanskrit to reinterpret the verses, the very common technique of our acharyas, so that actually the statements can be supporting Siddhanta or perhaps Siddhanta directly. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that Hiranyakashipu is saying to the teachers, to Shanda, you have taught something that has no worth, asaram. It has no value. However, the other meaning is you have taught something which has no comparison. There's nothing as good as this. So this is this sweet mood of the devotee that they don't want to hear things in opposition to Siddhanta. Okay, going on to text 27. So Hiranyakashipu accuses the teachers of being enemies described as friends and compares them to a disease. And he says both falsity and disease eventually manifest even if unknown at first. So this is pretty much true. You know, you may not realize at first you have a disease, but eventually you figure it out. And if people are what we call conning you, if they're, the word conning comes from the word confidence. We have in English, we call people con men. Of course, there are con women also. That means they get your confidence. They give you the impression that they are your friend and you can trust them. But con men specifically mean that actually their motive is to cheat you. And eventually, one figures this out when the cheating becomes obvious. So such people have always existed. Right now, such people are able to do electronic scams of great degrees of sophistication and complexity. And we're constantly being warned of more and more and more sophisticated cons and scams. And I'm sure that all of us know people who have gotten conned. I mean, I have a good friend and also a relative who were conned. And it looks like it's some authoritative source. It looks like it's a bona fide person who's acting as your friend and trying to help you. And actually, all they want to do is take your money. And these people will they'll often prey on people who especially should be protected. They'll often prey on people who are very vulnerable, some elderly people who don't have their full mental capacities, for example, and who are living off their savings, and they'll deplete their whole savings. So, and all of us are going to experience in our life, if we live long enough and if we're a normal person, we will all experience someone who's deceptive. They may not steal our money, but they will be deceptive in some way, that they'll appear to be nice, they'll appear to be a friend, they'll appear to be someone who's helping us, and actually they will not be in some way or another. They'll try to cause us trouble in some way while appearing as a friend. And this phenomena goes on, of course, even in Krishna's Leelas. So we have a number of demons who appear like cowherd boys, Pralambasura, Vyomasura. We have Vatsasura, who appears as a calf. We have, of course, Putana, who appears as a mother. Now, it's interesting. I bring up this point often because I find it so fascinating and unusual and incredible. And that is that Krishna has a very interesting attitude towards people who are enemies disguised as friends. It's not the kind of attitude that the rest of us have, including Hiranyakashipu. Hiranyakashipu he's really angry at Chanda. And although Amarka is not mentioned, one would assume he's also angry at Amarka, saying that you're enemies that look like friends. And he becomes so angry at Prahlad that he's going to try to kill him. So our general response to enemies that look like friends is that we're far more negatively affected by such persons than we are by enemies who look like enemies. If somebody comes up to us with a weapon to steal our money, we may be very traumatized by that. But we're going to be a lot more traumatized if somebody appears to be a friend and in some sneaky way takes the same amount of money. So why is that? I mean, we have a sense that our own ability to trust ourselves or to trust our own discretion and our own discrimination has been affected. And you kind of feel like your foundation in life is shaken. And this is why people get so upset over, say, marriage betrayals. So when you're married to somebody, usually married couples, they really trust each other. You're sleeping in the same house. While you're sleeping, the person could hurt you or kill you. You're pretty defenseless when you're sleeping. You share the keys to your home. You share the keys to your car. You share the passwords to your bank accounts and so forth, and access to all of your money and all of your things. So your home, your things, your body, you give your body completely to your spouse. And if that person cheats you, and they could cheat you sexually, obviously, by having some illicit lover. They could cheat you financially by, taking your money and gambling it away or something like that. There's various ways that they could be engaged in criminal activity. that you're unaware of. That's not that unusual, actually. And when a person discovers this, they're more upset with the betrayal than the actual harm. So, the reason that people are so upset over a spouse having affairs, the harm to them is not that great. It'd be hard to quantify the harm exactly, but it's the betrayal. I thought I could count on you, and this is a promise you made to me, and it's a very intimate promise, and you betrayed this promise. So that's our general, and people will, kill each other over this, literally. So that's our general response, and that's Hiranyakashipu's response. And Krishna's response is not like this at all. Not at all. Krishna's response is, if you have disguised yourself as a friend in some way, then I accept that disguise as service. So Krishna accepts Putana's disguise as service. He liberates these cowherd boys. He liberates Pandraka, who dresses up as Vishnu. It just, how Krishna thinks is so radically different. Of course, Krishna is not ever fooled. He's not actually conned, although it may appear to be, like Balaram supposedly didn't recognize Pralambasura. But Krishna deals very, very differently, that even a pretense of friendship is something that he takes as valuable, although he will kill the person for being a demon. He doesn't have enmity toward them. He has love toward them. It's really the opposite. It's quite astonishing. Yesterday, I was trying to help this one devotee who, very young, physically young, who is engaged to be married, and her fiance has rejected her, and her fiance's family has rejected her for not any reason that she can think of. And, she was just completely devastated by this. And she was saying, I never want to feel this way again. And I'm like, you're going to. People in the world will deal with you like this. So Hiranyakashipu, although, again, what's also interesting here is, although he's a demon, what he's speaking is true. That if there's enemies disguised as friends or a disease, you will find out the real truth eventually. Other thing we want to note here is just, and this is very much related to what I was talking about friends in disguise, is this whole mood of friends and enemies. That, Krishna just doesn't seem like that. Krishna doesn't really see Putana or Pralambasura or Vatsasura as an enemy. He's just not how he operates. And Hiranyakashipu is also so quick. He's just so quick to label a friend as an enemy. And I'm sure we've dealt with people like that, and maybe we're like that. How quickly do we assume that people are out to get us? How quickly do we assume that somebody is trying to hurt us, even if it's somebody with whom we've had a long-standing relationship? If any of you who are married, how quickly do you get angry at your spouse and interpret their behavior as having some deep meaning? You didn't wash the dishes in the sink, so you just don't love me anymore. You don't care about me anymore. So Hiranyakashipu says, boom. Prahlad's just saying Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. Oh, Skanda is an enemy. Okay, in 28, the teachers say Prahlad's devotion has no cause. And I find this also interesting because they thought it did have a cause, and they were asking Prahlad what the cause was. Just like Hiranyakashipu had asked, where did you learn this from? So the teachers were also asking Prahlad, where did you learn this? Where did you learn this? Where did you learn this? And Prahlad obviously convinced them that it didn't have any cause, that it was spontaneous. He said, just like iron is attracted to a magnet, I'm attracted to the Lord, and it's the Lord who's inspired me in this way. It's just arisen of its own accord. which is, of course, true and not true. So it is true. We were talking about yesterday how bhakti is inherent in the living entity. It doesn't really have a cause. It is there eternally. And we have a natural attraction to Krishna. But it is also true that that attraction has to be awakened, and generally it has to be awakened by a devotee. Occasionally it might be awakened by the Lord himself, by the mercy of the Lord himself, which is kind of what Prahlad Maharaj is suggesting, that it was awakened directly by the Lord. But that's unusual, because as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes in Madhurya Kadambini, that the Lord is neutral, and therefore he doesn't either facilitate or impede bhakti in a conditioned soul. He's just remaining neutral as an observer. But it's the devotee who goes to awaken bhakti. And of course, this is what Prahlad did. And then Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in Madhurya Kadambini says that the mercy of the Lord follows the mercy of the devotee. You can think of it, it's like the devotee's digging a trench. You know, there's a huge river, and the devotee digs a trench from the river to a field, which then has the river water flow into the field to irrigate the field. So the devotee is not impartial. And the devotee has some desire for someone to take up bhakti, and therefore the Lord's mercy follows the mercy of the devotees. Now, Shanda also says, don't insult brahmanas. Bad idea. So this concept is throughout the Shastra, that we shouldn't insult anybody, and we shouldn't offend anybody, and we should be kind to all living entities. Just like in the previous verses where Prabhupada says we should see all living entities as our Prabhus, and then he says we should see all the devotees as our Prabhus. So although we don't offend anybody, especially one should not offend devotees and brahmanas may not be devotees. So why is there this special thing? Let's put aside devotees right now. Why is there this special thing about brahmanas? Because Hiranyakashipu calls Shanda a Brahma Bandhu. You're not a real brahmana. Which, of course, then gives him, in his own mind, permission to be insulting, give the dog a bad name and hang him. The brahmanas are very vulnerable in society. The work of brahmanas is not seen as that valuable in society. I mean, I think some of the work of brahmanas, like teaching children and giving out medical care, that's generally seen as valuable. But a lot of the theoretical research and the study and the worship, etc., that brahmanas do are not seen as having practical value, kind of the substantial, insubstantial thing. And the brahmanas are not, although they may teach all kinds of subjects, they don't use those subjects to make a livelihood. So they might teach you how to run a business, but they themselves don't run a business. They might teach you how to use weapons, but they themselves are not supposed to be fighting on the battlefield and so forth. So the brahmanas have to be maintained by the society. And Prabhupada would talk about how there were brahmanas who were astrologers and doctors, and they would travel from house to house, and they would say to people, you know, is anyone here sick? Does anyone need medicine? And then they would also tell them something about their future. Prabhupada says everybody's interested to learn something about their future. And then they might also give some spiritual instruction, and people out of gratitude would give some donation. And they're therefore in a very vulnerable position in society. And society needs to be trained to respect such people. I think increasingly in our modern society, the opposite is happening, that teachers are not respected. Definitely scientists are not respected. Anybody without any kind of education and training can go online and say anything about anything. And people, oh, yes, if they sound authoritative enough. So this idea that one has to keep, especially the brahmanas, very carefully. Now, also on the practical level, so if we go back even a few thousand years, brahmanas has subtle powers. And if a brahmana said to you, you know, become a frog, you became a frog, like right then and there. And the brahmanas would demonstrate these powers Like they do these yagyas where they put in an old horse and the horse would come out as a young colt. And so, you insult the Brahmanas, you may get into trouble. So Hiranyakashipu accepts this from Chandra. He accepts that Chandra didn't do anything and he shouldn't insult Brahmanas. So he turns his anger from the teachers to Prahlad. And he thinks bhakti is inauspicious. So he said that it is insubstantial, and now he's saying it's inauspicious. It's not good for you. This mentality is also very common among the materialistic people, that religion is not good for you. People blame, they say the majority of wars are religious wars. That is not historically correct. The majority of wars are for power and money. Even if ostensibly, even if superficially, it's claimed that religion is the cause. It is not. Just like when the Spaniards came to the Western Hemisphere and waged war against the indigenous persons, they did so in the name of converting them to Catholicism. But that wasn't and they did that. The majority of people in Central and South America are Roman Catholic. So that was their excuse, but mostly they were interested in stealing their wealth. That was their primary interest. It was, we have, the instances with the Incas, say in South America, where the conquistadors would say, well, if you become a Christian, we'll kill you quickly. And if you don't convert to Christianity, we'll kill you slowly and painfully. But anyway, people blame religion as being unauspicious. They also blame religion, like Marx, who said it was the opiate of the people, as keeping people from dealing with the real problems of life, making them fatalistic. People also think it's inauspicious because they think it's not based on fact, it's based on faith. And therefore, people are going to make decisions based on belief that are not going to be good for them or others, how they deal with, say, medical care. We're not going to treat our sick child because we just want to pray. So people think this is all inauspicious. Whereas, of course, Sri Rupa Goswami says it's the most auspicious. Okay, then our next grouping of verses is 30 to 31, which is Prahlad responding to his father. So both of these verses, 30 and 31, are very famous. They are verses that Srila Prabhupada quotes a lot. So 30 is about chewing the chewed. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments, he says, bhakti does not arise in you. For you, it is insubstantial, because you do not have the dust from the feet of devotees. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that those who want to use the Bhagavad Gita for, quote unquote, adjusting things materially cannot always think of Krishna, or they'll think Krishna is fictional. And the commentary is that Prahlad is being sarcastic. So it's this kind of interesting. Prahlad is kind of increasing his kind of punch to his father. And he says materialistic people cannot learn bhakti from others. They cannot learn bhakti by their own efforts, and they cannot learn bhakti both by their own efforts and by a combination from others. So these are these two really important points in text 30, that, you're just chewing the chewed. You're the one who has things that are insubstantial. You're chewing on old chewing gum. You're chewing on old sugarcane. There's nothing in it, but you're so attached to this chewing the chewed that you're never going to be able to learn bhakti. Not by someone else teaching you, not by yourself, and not by a combination. So I don't know why you're asking me who taught me this, because you're not going to be able to get it anyway. Then 31 is also a very important verse, although not quoted quite as much perhaps as 30, about following blind leaders and thus being led into a ditch. Like he's saying the people that you're taking as teachers, Sukracharya and Skandanamarka, they're misleading you. Just like if blind people follow another blind person, they're just going to fall down. They're just going to trip. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur comments, he says that Prahlad Maharaj is saying, oh, fool. Oh, no, sorry. That Hiranyakashipu is saying, oh, fool, you are criticizing me, your father, whose feet are worshipped by Indra. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary is probably referring to previous verses where the teachers call Hiranyakashipu the enemy of Indra. So Prahlad's, he's getting a lot more in his father's face, and Hiranyakashipu is getting more angry. So some interesting points here before we take a break. So we have disease is mentioned in the purport of 27, which Prabhupada says is the most sinful and miserable of the conditions of material life. And Prabhupada lists sins with corresponding diseases. And that list he got from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So I think we would agree that disease is the most sinful and miserable of birth, death, old age, and disease. Hiranyakashipu compares the teachers to a disease, and later he will compare Prahlad to a disease. So this is obviously, he likes this metaphor. And as I said, Prahlad Maharaj keeps getting stronger. So like first, the first time that Hiranyakashipu takes Prahlad out of school and asks him what's going on, Prahlad says, be detached and worship Hari. Then after he comes back from school again, and he's asked again, he starts about Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smarnam. He describes the 9 processes of devotion. That's much more in your face than just worship Hari. And when his father gets angry at that description, then he basically insults his father. He's speaking sarcastically and he's insulting. He's saying, you're not going to understand any of this, and you're just going to go to hellish life. And the purport to 31, Prabhupada writes, Hiranyakashipu was extremely angry and wanted to rebuke his son for deriding his teacher or spiritual master who'd been born in the Brahmin family of the great Acharya, Sukracharya. Now, this is very ironic. I'm going to read this again. This is again from purport 31. Hiranyakashipu was extremely angry and wanted to rebuke his son for deriding his teacher or spiritual master who'd been born in the Brahmana family of the great Acharya, Sukracharya. Now, this is ironic because Hiranyakashipu has just himself insulted the teachers. All right, so we're going to take our break again to the top of the hour or to the half an hour, depending on where you are in the world, and come back again at the same time. And please take a real break. We have this break because the brain cannot go on continuously. It needs to have some break in activity. So stand up, move around, get some fresh air, drink some water or something. Actually take a break. Okay, we'll see you again in about 12 minutes. Hey, Krishna. So now we're going to do some interactive things. I don't have that many for this lesson, so I'm not sure if we're going to go all the way to the end of our normal time. I'd like to do something we haven't done yet, and that is some group work. So, Shakti Swarupini, are you there?
Yes, Mataji.
Would you be willing to, how many people do we have altogether?
Right now, 25 means 23 students are there. Otherwise, there are 24 registered students and 3 guests for your classes.
All right. Would you be willing to put people in groups of 3 or 4?
Okay.
And just so if you could set that up, well, I'm going to tell them what they're going to do, and then you can just like start it. So I'd like us to discuss how do we deal with people who appear to be our friends and later prove to be otherwise. Now, in your groups, please don't mention the names of specific people, but just how do we respond to this? And I'd like us to talk about how we respond to this externally, but also how we respond to it emotionally, because we're really looking at an emotional response from Hiranyakashipu here. So how do we respond emotionally to people who appear to be our friends and later prove to be otherwise? So we can take 10 minutes for this. And Shakti Swarupini, can you let me know when are you ready to start the group?
Shall I start? Okay.
Yes, please. Right. Well, I hope that all of you had some insight as to how much we're like Hiranyakashipu and how much we're like Krishna in how we respond to such situations. Okay. And I'm wondering about why doesn't Prahlad reply directly to the question that his father spoke in verse 29. So, verse 29, if we get, I'll take from verse 29 and I'll put it in the chat. So this is the question Hiranyakashipu asked in verse 29. You rascal, most fallen of our family, if you have not received this education from your teachers, where have you gotten it? Now, Prahlad doesn't even respond the way he did to his teachers, which is, well, yeah, it's by the grace of Vishnu. It just appeared spontaneously. He doesn't say that at all, right? What does he say? He says, well, let's look again at his responses. I'm going to put his responses in the chat. So that's his first response in text 30. And then his next response in text 31. And this is, again, his response is kind of sarcastic. It's insulting. Where'd you get this knowledge? Let's just look at this exchange. Right? Where have you gotten this knowledge? And uncontrolled sense people like you're going to chew what's already been chewed. You can't learn it from anybody. And you're just following blind leaders that are leading you into a ditch because you're attached to sense objects. And, you're just, you're just going to enter into hellish life. You're just going to suffer. By the way, well, no, I won't say. Well, I'll wait to see what you have to say. So why did Prahlad do this? I'd like everyone to please write something in the chat. Why doesn't Prahlad respond directly? Why doesn't he just answer his father's question? So if everybody could write something in the chat. I found it interesting that some of you said he wanted to be respectful to Hiranyakashipu. He's being very insulting to his father. He's saying, you're an idiot. You're a fool. You're materially attached. You're a fool. So he definitely wasn't showing respect to his father. Here, okay, let's look at some of these answers. I think some of them are really, really nice. So if we could take a look at that. He is concerned about his father. He doesn't want Hiranyakashipu to go after Narada. That's definitely true. He's trying to protect Narada. And okay, he answers because materialists, well, that's what he says, but Mahalakshmi, the question is, why does he say that? Why doesn't he answer it directly? He doesn't want to offend him directly. He's offending his father. According to our acharyas, he's definitely offending his father. So he doesn't have any fear of his father. His fear of his father is decreasing. And we're seeing this progression in Prahlad, that his fear of his father is decreasing. And so he's trying to preach to his father. He wanted to just blame himself. But again, he doesn't blame himself here like he did to his teachers. To his teachers, he blamed himself. To here, he doesn't even talk about it. He doesn't really answer it at all. Okay, he wants to protect Narada. And then I like what Sitarani said. He doesn't answer the way he answered to his teachers because Hiranyakashipu is too sinful to understand that. So he doesn't say it's the attraction of iron to a magnet. He doesn't even bother. His father's not going to understand. I like this answer. He says, you're not going to understand it. Okay, he's trying the preaching approach. Yeah. So I like this by Dvaita Krishna. He didn't feel that Hiranyakashipu would understand. So he sidestepped him and gave him sarcasm. Indirectly giving respect to his father, I don't think he was really. And I like what Sri Radha Govinda said, reaction to a narcissistic abuse is gray rocking. That's what Prahlad is doing. Maybe you can define what gray rocking is doing, because I want to know what that is. Prahlad has already said the conversation before, which was in vain. Right, he already had that conversation with his teachers, didn't work. So now he just gets to the point. He might have felt frustrated by repeating opposition from fathers and teachers. Very, very probable, actually, that Prahlad is like, hey, you guys, this is just useless. Why you keep asking me these questions? You're never going to understand them anyway, you idiots. Okay. Yeah, I like this thing from Sitarani also, that he says you have to, although he doesn't name Narada, he says Mahat Kripa, you have to get the mercy of a devotee. So he indirectly indicates that he did get the mercy of a devotee. Okay. I like this also from Prasan. He's accelerating what is destined to happen, as Narada had done with Kamsa. Interesting, interesting. Sri Radha Govinda, what is gray rocking? As all of us deal with some narcissistic and psychopathic and sociopathic people in our lives, what's gray rocking?
So a gray rock is something that's there, but it's not really responsive. So similarly, when we have to respond to a narcissist, they will take anything against us. They will attack somebody that we're naming. They gaslight us if we try to say something and turn it against us. So a gray rocking technique is not to be reactionary, not to react, to not express our vulnerability, to not expose our secrets in front of them, and just to kind of ignore, but without. So it's like a gray rock. It's just a gray rock. It's just there. So, hey, how is the weather? Yeah, this is something, but not to reveal anything that they can use against us.
Interesting, interesting. I never would have understood it that way. I was thinking about rocking back and forth, gray rocking, instead of becoming like a gray rock. So thank you very much for that explanation. Okay, so in the purport of text 30, Prabhupada talks about the scholars who can't understand Krishna. Let's take a look at this. So when Prabhupada is writing about Matirna Krishna, he's talking about politicians. Oh, one other thing I want to say, actually, before we do this, about Prahlad's response to his father. It was a very political response. Prahlad definitely knows how to be a politician. He definitely, absolutely knows. I mentioned this before with his response to his teachers, but he knows how to be a politician. He doesn't have a mentality of friends and enemies, but he knows how to be a politician. Politicians are expert at sidestepping direct questions. So, and we read that early on, that Prahlad Maharaj already understood all these things, even before he went to school. So it's not that great devotees, they're Rajarshis. They know how to be Raja, they know how to be a king, but they know how to be as a Rishi. Okay, so looking at this purport in 30, Prabhupada talks about politicians, scholars, philosophers and scholars who are interested in using the Bhagavad Gita as a vehicle for adjusting things materially. For them, constant thought of Krishna or Krishna consciousness is impossible. He writes, the so-called politicians and scholars think of Krishna as fictitious. The politician says that his Krishna is different from the Krishna depicted in Bhagavad Gita. Even though he accepts Krishna and Rama as a supreme, he thinks of Rama and Krishna as impersonal because he has no idea of service to Krishna. Thus, his only business is punascharvita charvinanam, chewing the chewed again and again. The aim of such politicians and academic scholars is to enjoy this material world. So why do you think Srila Prabhupada talks about that in this verse? Where's this coming from? Any thoughts? If you want to either raise your hand or write something in the chat as you like. Any thoughts to why Prabhupada's talking about this? What's impelling Srila Prabhupada to say these things? Anybody have any idea?
I didn't catch the question. Can you please repeat?
Why is Prabhupada saying this? Why did Prabhupada write this in this purport? What's it coming from? Okay, this is what politicians are doing at present. Can we get a little bit more specific? Advaita Krishna Prabhu, any idea why Prabhupada wrote this in the purport?
You can relate to Prabhupada always talking about Radhakrishna Menon and also Gandhi
You
being
got it.
important politicians. Yep.
Yep, you got it. You hit it. Prabhupada's talking about Gandhi and he's talking about the Radhakrishna mission. Yes, that's what Srila Prabhupada's talking about. And Prabhupada had all this experience, right? The Gandhi. I remember when we met with Srila Prabhupada in, I guess, was March of 75 in New York. And my father was asking about keeping up with the news. And of course, Prabhupada did keep up with the headlines of the news. But Prabhupada was saying that there's just so much uselessness. He gave the example, he said, Gandhi said, I don't believe there was such a person as Krishna living ever. And so Gandhi was reading the Bhagavad Gita, he's quoting the Bhagavad Gita, but he's misinterpreting the Bhagavad Gita to support nonviolence, and he's saying that Krishna is fictitious. And, Prabhupada grew up in a time when Gandhi was very influential. I mean, Prabhupada himself was part of Gandhi's movement for a while. And and then this Dr. Radhakrishna who's saying, this is not the real Krishna. So Prabhupada's definitely putting this in this purport because of his own experience in India with these people, these very specific people, although he doesn't name them by name. He doesn't generally name them by name. Why else do you think he's putting this in this purport? So he has his own experience, definitely, and why else?
Because that was a main sort of that was a main line of thought in relationship to studying Bhagavad Gita. And he was fighting against that. Srila Prabhupada was actually, Nirvishesha Sunyavad and all of that. Very much his mission. Very much his mission.
I like that. Yes. Okay, Sitarani, yes.
Mataji, I think that Prabhupada is also putting it there because he kind of wants to say what Prahlad Maharaj would say in the next shloka, that Shanda and Amarka, although they are like Brahmanas, but they don't know the real thing. They don't know who the Lord is. So we often see Prabhupada kind of, speaks about what's coming next in his purport earlier. So
sort of foreshadowing, anticipating the next purport. Any other thoughts about why Prabhupada? This is something Prabhupada brings up over and over again. About scholars and politicians and who are misreading and misleading according to the Shastra. Any other thoughts why Prabhupada brings this up? You think about yesterday when we were talking about where people in general use religion for material gain. Is that something we have to be careful of in our own self? And is that something we have to be careful of in leaders? Do you think that there is a reasonable chance that we're going to have leaders and preachers in the world at any given time who are doing this? I mean, I don't think Gandhi and Dr. Radhakrishna were the last. I don't think they were the only and the last. And some of these people might even come into our Hare Krishna movement. There's a natural tendency in every religion for things to kind of veer off towards bhakti and mukti. It happens in every religion, historically speaking. So we should expect that there's going to be kind of a tendency to go to karma and gyan and to try to misinterpret. So it's something Prabhupada's emphasizing again and 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 again. And talking about, politicians, scholars, we're going to tend to be influenced by people like that. We're going to think, well, you're a scholar, you're a politician, you're wise, your interpretation is going to be better. I'm going to follow you. Now, something else just occurred to me. Could there be some harm from this kind of instruction? Could we misunderstand and misapply this instruction in a way that might be harmful to our movement and ourselves? This is a tricky question.
Can I?
Sure.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe not misapply if we understand the philosophy correctly, but maybe in the presentation we could make a mistake and mess up the movement's reputation.
Okay. Anyone else? Advaita Krishna Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I think we had a discussion with some friends of mine from England who were staying with me in the last weekend. We say that when we do more targeted preaching to a certain class of people, and he was noticing different temples in Europe, I won't say where, and also in India, we tend to actually dilute. When you do targeted preaching to a certain class of people, maybe a rich upper class, or maybe the glitzy people, the Bollywood people, or certain class of science people or certain class of politicians, we tend to actually dilute our philosophy.
I like that. I'm also thinking that I had an interchange recently with one devotee, and a devotee that I respect a lot, who sent me a 17-page blog that made statements about the Hare Krishna movement, our Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy and Christianity, and our ISKCON history. And he asked me my opinion. He said, is this accurate? And I, looking just the first page or two, I said, this is extremely inaccurate. And one thing I said to the devotee who brought it to my attention is I said, the person writing this doesn't have any credentials to speak about these things. He doesn't have any credentials to understand Christianity. He doesn't, what credentials does he have to understand ISKCON history? And he's not citing any sources. And I said, then you've asked me, and because my friend then was arguing with me that I was wrong. And I said, you've asked me, but I actually have credentials. I said, I've actually been a professor of sociology of religion, and I was teaching accredited undergrad courses in sociology of religion, and I taught accredited undergrad courses in the history of ISKCON. And said, so I actually have the credentials. So I do see that we have kind of a strange attitude, perhaps, in ISKCON towards scholars and scholarship, that we don't also recognize people who has the actual credentials to talk about something. So a lot of times these statements that, the academics and the scholars and the politicians, they're misusing Bhagavad Gita, can make us sort of anti-scholarship and anti-academics, so that we'll accept just some completely erroneous, unresearched, uncitationed, somebody's complete speculations over someone who's actually done study in the field. That we have an attitude that these quotes tell us not to respect actual scholarship. So I see there's a misuse of them in that way. Yes, Ajay Prabhu.
Yeah, Mata, you just said the point I was thinking of, is that many times, we say, we need to attack the scientists. Bhakti Vedanta Institute, and many times this point comes up, that Prabhupada said, you're going to attack the scientists, go face them. That, do you have the ingredients? Can you create a body? Things like that.
Yes.
So be careful and then attack them. That God exists. They don't understand. But many scientists are actually not atheists.
Correct.
So we have to be very careful when we are conversing with scientists, not just because he's a scientist, goes to attack. We have to, not do that.
Yes. So it's a two ways. It's not that just because you have a degree and just because you're a scholar and just because you're a politician, that whatever you say is true. And it's not that just because you're a scholar and a politician, that whatever you say is false.
Right.
So, that just some Bhakta Bob, knows more about something than somebody who actually has studied religion. So, and has actually studied the Shastra. So this is something that I run into all the time, kind of this dismissal of qualifications. All right. So if materialists can't learn bhakti in any way, if someone who's materially attached They're attached to sense gratification, right? How does Prahlad Maharaj put it? Because of their uncontrolled senses, persons too addicted to materialistic life make progress towards hellish conditions. He was insulting his father, telling him you're going to go to hell. And repeatedly chew that which has already been chewed. Their inclinations toward Krishna are never aroused, either by the instructions of others, by their own effort, or a combination of both. So why are we preaching? Seems like Prahlad Maharaj is saying it's all useless. Of course, he becomes a preacher very soon, not quite yet in the story. But why do we preach? Some thoughts.
We preach, first of all, for our own purification.
Ooh.
So this, we have to follow. This is a very difficult subject matter that, that we have to control our senses, not go sense gratification, engage in sense gratification all the time. We are not going to develop Krishna consciousness. So this message first we apply to ourselves, and then we share it with others. We say, look, this is what I found.
Okay, so that, Mahalakshmi is also saying the more we share, the greater the realization. Yes, we all experience this.
Yeah.
I experience this almost every time that I try to share Krishna consciousness, that my own understanding increases. So we can have good association, because devotees are merciful, but we're not supposed to throw pearls before swine. It's actually an offense, right, to preach the glories to the faithless. So yeah, I often preach to my family and friends to convince myself. Yes, we share the mercy. The more you give Krishna, the more you get. But I'm still not quite sure. All right, dry wood and wet wood. Those are like dry wood would cross over. All right, we have this Krishna Prema is already in everyone's heart. That's the Majja 22-107. Following the footsteps of Prabhupada, and actually the footsteps of Prahlad Maharaj, who does preach. So how is this relevant to us, folks? How is this statement of Prahlad Maharaj? What do we do with this? Attached people are not going to learn Krishna on their own or from hearing from anybody. Thoughts. What do we do with this? Bhaktisiddhanta says only the dead don't preach. Okay, but I still want to know, what are we going to do with Prahlad Maharaj's statement?
I think the statement is just pure insult.
You're going to dismiss it as just insult. Okay, well, that's one way. Any other thoughts? What are we going to do with this? Okay, I like what Sitarani is saying. Different approaches for different people. Yes. And this point has to be kind of juxtaposed with the point that was made about, are we watering down? Sometimes it may not be watering down. Sometimes it may be adjusting the presentation. That like when I was preaching to evangelical Southern Baptist ministers who were in a master's degree program, I didn't talk about deity worship, because if I did, then they would reject this completely. And we were able to get them to chant Hare Krishna. So someone could say, well, you're watering it down. You're not talking about the deities. So there is a difference between watering things down and being appropriate. The statement is a form of preaching. Okay, Nilamani. Anybody else? You are not aware at the first place whether one is innocent or envious. I like this, Asik Prabhu. Yeah, you have to make some effort to preach, and then you can see if someone's envious, then you avoid them. But yeah, that's not necessarily obvious at first. You can't even tell by externals, like Gadadhar Pandit was critical of Punjarik virginity. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts as to what we can do with this? We have to have some application for this. What about Sorry, any of you guys who've had me as a teacher before, you know I'm going to do this to you. What about some kind of introspective application? Any kind of mirror application for this for us? Sitarani, you have any thoughts?
Mataji, I was thinking as a personal application that not to fall in the trap of being a materialist and at the same time try really hard to serve a pure devotee. And by their mercy, one could remain on track.
Very nice, because that's what Prahlad says. He says, you're only going to do this by the dust of the devotees. Yes. Yes, Ajay Prabhu.
Mataji, Prabhupada mentions these words many times. He says it for us, not for others. In his lectures, it's meant for us. That punar charvita pacharvananam, we just keep chewing the chewed, that we keep gratifying our senses over and over. No one keeps trying the same thing. It's not going to help. We're going to waste our life doing that.
Yeah. To just think, if I'm not making advancement as quickly or as deeply as I would like, it's most likely because I'm holding on to some attachments, or I'm not really taking the mercy of the devotees, or some combination of both. I see that it's applicable both in preaching to others. If I run into someone who's really an attached materialist, then I'm actually not supposed to be preaching the glories of the Lord to them. I can give them some prasadam, I can get them to chant Hare Krishna, I can talk about things that are kind of peripheral to Krishna consciousness. I was mentioning earlier about near-death experiences. I had one woman come to me in Bhaktivedanta Manor that she was coming to the temple regularly, and she said her husband was a complete atheist, and she wanted to know if I could help. So I said, well, bring him to the temple. And when he came, I just talked to him about near-death experiences. That's the only thing I talked to him about. I said, there's empirical evidence that there's something beyond the body, that we're not just gross matter. I didn't even talk about spiritual. I just talked about subtle matter. And finally, he agreed. And then he became interested to hear more. So sometimes Prabhupada would just talk to people about vegetarianism. Sometimes Prabhupada just talked to people about not eating cows. He'd say, go eat goats. So I think that this instruction is there for how we are going to preach to others. And it's also there to say, hey, what's going on with my advancement? Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is, what does chewing the chewed mean? What does that mean? Yes, Sitarani.
According to me, it means that trying to enjoy in this material world, failing every time, yet not giving up the hope.
Oh, okay, Golokavasini says doing the same thing again and again, but you could apply that to going to kirtan again and again too. So I think that's true, but not complete. Narada Rishi says, trying to enjoy what we tried enjoying before and did not enjoy in the first place. And hoping that this time it will work. Right? So doing the same thing, Albert Einstein, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Yes. And this you see, people who marry over and over again. Well, maybe if I just married this person, or maybe if I just married that person, or maybe if I married somebody of the other gender, or, it's like, but it's the same thing. It's not going to work. Yes, the same pattern over and over again. Something that doesn't satisfy us, that, we've tried and it's not satisfying us, and we just keep thinking. And this is the whole material civilization, is keep trying to do the same. Prabhupada said, a man will say, well, I wasn't happy in my life, but I'm going to engage my children in doing the things that didn't make me happy. Trying to get the juice from matter and get hurt again and again. Oh, now that's another important point that Stuti Priyarada is bringing up. Trying to get juice from matter. Trying to get rasa from matter. I saw a picture some time ago of a puppy dog licking a picture of food. And And Prabhupada, I just heard the other day, Prabhupada telling the story from Aesop's Fables of the dog who walks by some water and in the water sees his own reflection. And the dog is carrying some food, but in the reflection, he sees that there's another dog with some food. So he ends up jumping in the water, losing his food, going after the reflection of the food. You know, Krishna is saying how the world is like an upside down banyan tree. So the things, material sense gratification, actually, there's no rasa in it. And, you know, it's dry, it's cardboard. It's just a picture. Or, you know, if you think about entertainment, you know, you're feeling the person watching the drama or the film or whatever, you know, or reading the book, and they're feeling some rasa, but it's not actually there. You know, the hero kills the bad guy or gets the beautiful woman, and you're as the observer, you're feeling as if you killed the bad guy or you got the beautiful woman, but you really didn't. You're just sitting in the theater. You know, there's nothing actually happening. When you leave the theater, the bad guy is still running around in the real world, and the beautiful woman is ignoring you in the real world. You know, it's not, there's no substance. We were talking before about substance. So it's empty, it's been chewed, it's tasteless, there's no rasa, and you're trying to get rasa from it. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. I don't really have anything else to discuss on these verses. So if any of you have anything that you'd like to bring up or any questions on any of the 3 classes we've had so far, we can open it up. So yes, Srimad Govinda.
Hare Krishna. You brought up this point about misusing this application of maybe ignoring certain material qualifications or expertise. And I was specifically thinking of jurisprudence like justice and mercy. For example, child abuse stories in the movement where 2 principles are there, protecting children. Then what about protecting brahmanas or the elderly in case of, say, sannyasi having abused a child or some sort of thing like that? How do we bring about the culture of the importance of training, not only on the shastric level, but also on the jurisprudence level? Because some devotees get stuck on only one side of reality, and they don't want to take the holistic point about education. So I'd like to know what should be as...
What I think you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is this is about the point about like scholars and stuff, where we have a knee-jerk reaction either to trust somebody just because they have a title, or we're not to trust somebody just because they have a title. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something else?
You know, sometimes devotees are like, we know Bhagavatam, we know the scriptures, and they discard or disregard the whole law system or jurisprudence. For example, a proportionality of a punishment in terms of a crime. We tend to get sentimental as an organization. And
okay, so distrusting actual authorities.
Yeah, distrusting systems like jurisprudence.
Yes. I mean, again, I see it's a misuse of Prabhupada's statements criticizing these false authorities, is that people just say, well, we're not going to accept any kind of authority. We're not going to accept any kind of rule. Or, you know, the concept that because Prahlad's criticizing concepts of friends and enemies, but he knew how to be an expert diplomat, and he knew how to administer justice, and he knew how to be a good ruler, but in the proper consciousness. I think what you're talking about is the same mistake Arjuna was making, that, you know, I'm just going to throw everything out. And Krishna says, no, don't throw it out, do it properly. So there's these 2 problems. One is that we just become materialists. And then the other is, you know, we're just going to follow any materialistic system or any materialistic authority, whether or not it's valid. And the other is that we're just going to throw everything away. You know, we don't need systems of governance. We don't need systems of justice. We don't need systems of scholarship. You know, we're just going to love Krishna. And you could see how people can get that kind of an interpretation from these verses and purports, how they can skew that. You know, And which is why I keep making the point. Like Prahlad Maharaj talks about Grahastha life, but he gets married. He talks about don't see friends and enemies, but he becomes a ruler. On the order of God, he becomes a ruler. Nrsingadev specifically has him to become a ruler. And he's definitely dealing, even as a child, with his teachers and his father in a diplomatic way. He's dealing with them as an expert devotee politician. Actually, Prabhupada says one of the 26 qualities of a devotee is daksha, or expert. And he said the brahmachari should be trained to know something of everything and everything of something. And we shouldn't be callous towards material expertise. The point is to do it in a different consciousness. To do it in the consciousness, what did we read yesterday? I'm Krishna's servant. 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 How can I administer justice as Krishna's servant? How can I do scholarship as Krishna's servant? Yes, Sitarani.
Mataji, the theme throughout this section has been mainly about friends and enemies. And the exercise that you gave about, seeing a friend and seeing an enemy, a friend behaving like an enemy. So how does one really kind of cross over to the other side and not really see or differentiate between friends and enemies, even as a devotee, practicing devotee?
Well, this is something that I can't say that I've perfected. I'm working on it. When people who've appeared to be friends and have engaged in heinous behavior, it's very difficult. But it's something to practice, saying that Krishna is allowing Mare Krishna Rake Krishna Mare. That there are people who've tried to help me and not been able to, and people who've tried to hurt me and not been able to. And sometimes I try to help people and I can't, and I'm sure there's times I've tried to hurt people and I can't. So our ability to help or hurt is not totally under our control. So if somebody has hurt me, then Krishna has allowed that person to hurt me. People do not have independent power. And why has Krishna allowed it? What's the lesson for me? Maybe the lesson for me is I also have hurt other people. And I need to have a mirror put up so that I can see that in myself and stop that. About a year or so ago, I confronted a devotee who had really done some heinous harm to others. And I said to this devotee, you yourself have been harmed. How could you harm somebody else like this? And this person said to me, well, I thought I was fine. I didn't think I was really harming anybody. So sometimes people hurt us so that we can see that. Where is this in myself? Sometimes people hurt us just as our lesson is become more tolerant and more compassionate. Now, tolerance and compassion does not mean that justice shouldn't be enacted. That's not, those two things are not incompatible. You cannot hold on to, you can let go of anger and resentment against somebody and still bring them to justice. But to see that under everything is Krishna, and to always have compassion, because when people behave wrongly, it's due to some problem within themselves. Like I said the other day, Hiranyakashipu was miserable. When he's yelling at the demigods for no reason, that's an indication that he's miserable. So we can have compassion. Compassion, again, doesn't mean that you don't bring someone to justice. This is kind of the interesting statement of Dharma the Bull in the first canto, where he says, if you name the perpetrator, you're as bad as the perpetrator. Now, that can't be literal. If somebody steals my money and the police come, who stole your money? Well, that guy. But of course, Dharma doesn't even say that. I mean, Parikit's like, who beat you? And he doesn't say, well, duh, the guy's standing right there. I mean, I don't even understand why Parikshit asked the question, really, because Kali's like right there, and Dharma doesn't say that. Can you? He doesn't say that. But Dharma gives 7 reasons for suffering. And in none of them does he say the person who's the agent of my suffering is the one responsible for my suffering. And Parikshit, of course, does punish Kali. He does take him to task. He doesn't say that, he glorifies Dharma's insight. And he says, oh, because you're speaking like this, you're the personality of religion. But then he does punish the wrongdoer. So although Krishna is allowing if someone deserves good, if we choose to be the agent of that good, we benefit. And if someone deserves bad and we choose to be the agent of that bad, we suffer. Krishna can give somebody harm without our being the agent of it. And then we have some demoniac mentality. So anyway, that's the way to do it. To see what is Krishna's hand behind this, to have compassion on the person. I mean, another thing to do is always to ask, am I sure I'm right? Sometimes we think someone's our enemy and we don't know the whole story. So the first question should always be, am I sure I'm interpreting this situation correctly? Am I 100% sure? Is my interpretation true? Am I looking at the facts or am I looking at my interpretation of the facts? And is my interpretation absolutely true? Am I 100% certain? I always remember I was having a discussion with our youngest son, and I said something, and he said, Mata, are you sure? I said, yes, sure. He said, are you 100% sure? And then I stopped, and I said, what do you know? So, that's always the first question. Am I absolutely sure that my interpretation of what this person has done is objective? Am I conflating facts with my interpretation? And is my interpretation correct? Once we ascertain that things are actually correct, then what's my lesson? What am I supposed to learn from this? How should I change my behavior? How should I change my attitude? How can I use this situation to get closer to Krishna? The next step is compassion for the person. And that compassion might be, may you learn through joy. That's Prahlad's response to his father at the very, 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 very end, which someone else will be teaching you. I end my classes at the prayers of the demigod, so I'm not going to teach that part. But the very end where Prahlad says, may my father be liberated. He says, my father was an offender. May he be liberated. So may those who hurt me learn through joy. I want them to learn. I want them to be rectified. I don't want them to go on hurting people. I'm not dismissing their offensive behavior, but may they learn through joy. Because I want to learn through joy. I don't like learning through suffering. I really don't like learning through suffering. And I really prefer to learn in ecstatic ways. So I would like, and we actually, according to empirical research, we actually learn better, and our learning is of longer duration when we're having fun. So I would like to learn joyfully, and I would like those who offend me to learn joyfully. And then if there is some need to involve the justice system, then we need to do that. Out of duty, out of a service to Krishna. If someone needs to be reported to the police, if someone needs to be put in jail, we talked about that yesterday, argumentum ad baculam. There are some times when people need to be punished. All right, so we don't have any class tomorrow.